Hello, John Dove here, and welcome to the next episode of the Conversations with Counsel Speed Mooting podcast. Today we've got a very special guest. Our guest today is Emma-Justine Michaux. Apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly, and I'm sure you'll correct me in just a moment. Emma-Justine is a county court advocate. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So we always like to start with a nice, easy icebreaker question with our guests. And you are absolutely no different. So please describe for us, Emma-Justine, your perfect day.
I think my perfect day would be walking in Paris, having a nice coffee, walking by the Seine, seeing my family and my friends, and having nice food.
Oh, wow. I've heard the food is meant to be very nice in Paris as well.
All the food in all of France, it's just very different food from England, so I miss it a lot.
Guessing you don't get roast dinners in France?
No.
Perfect. All right, well, we'll start with some legal questions then. So would you like to tell us all about your journey into the law so far?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a complicated one. I did a double degree of French and English law, which is basically I'm French. I've done my whole life in France up until university, and it's a French university that had an agreement with the University of Essex. So it was 4 years. Well, 3 years for the undergraduate degree, 2 years at the University of Essex, and then you did your third year at the French University, and then at the end of that you had a double degree. In addition, I also took a Spanish law degree diploma, so technically I also have a Spanish law degree, and then I did a master's in crime and criminology, and then I decided to go to England and take the bar. So I went back to England and took the bar with a master's again, because that's something that you can do with a bar, and it also gives you access to the government loan if you haven't had a scholarship to fund the whole bar. So that's why I did two, and in terms of studies, that's it.
Wow, quite a lot there then. So what was it that made you initially decide to study law in the first place?
So I was always interested in crime. I mean, you know how you watch those criminal series on TV? That's how it started for me. And obviously it's a bit difficult to know what to do to be involved in that. So I thought I'll start with law. And then at that point, I didn't know whether it was going to be the police or whether it was going to be lawyer or judge. I had no idea. I just knew that I couldn't see anything else at that point to get me to crime. So I went into that. And then I did an internship, which led me to think I want to be a lawyer. But yeah, so I didn't start thinking I want to be a lawyer. I just started thinking I want to do crime.
So where did you do your internship?
So it was a criminal law firm in Paris, Aïlia-Lagabin-Graillot. So Aïlia-Lagabin-Graillot is the name of the partner. And at the time he took me in as an intern, he'd just started. So it was just me and him, basically. He's now expanded, but at that time, it was, I think, the first few months of him starting on his own. So it was great because I got to do so many things I think you can't do as an intern if there's a lot of employees and a lot of lawyers working on cases. So that was an amazing experience.
Completely agreed. Something I talk about all the time. So I qualified as a solicitor before I moved across to the bar, and the firm I did my training contract with was a very small firm, and I felt that I was able to see a lot more and do a lot more at an early stage in my career than I would have done if I was in a multinational, large sort of global practice. So I completely agree with you there. It's nice to be in that sort of small firm, and you feel like you're a much bigger cog in the wheel, don't you?
Yeah, and I encourage everyone who's just starting to look for those smaller companies. And also, I think the difficulty is those smaller companies won't have the big advertisements on LinkedIn or on those other pages. So I always encourage people to reach out to those small companies, to lawyers who are acting on their own, because I feel like that's where you get your better chance at having a quality work experience early on, because it's very difficult early on to have a position of responsibility when you've just graduated or you're still studying. So I definitely encourage people to go to smaller firms and reach out.
Yeah, completely agree. Now, of course, in this country, in the UK and England, we have a separated legal system. So we have barristers and we have solicitors. Do you have a separated out legal profession in France, or is it a fused profession over there?
No, it's all very different. So all students who want to be lawyers have to pass the bar, and there's no distinction between solicitors and barristers. And so that means when you're studying, you go through the same degrees, through the same process. And it also means that how work is dealt with in firms is also different. So what you would call a paralegal in England would actually be doing a lot of the solicitor work in France, and then the lawyers would be going to court. But would also be doing the prep of the cases ahead. So there's advantages and disadvantages because, I can see as a county court advocate, I'm sure you have more insights as a barrister, but sometimes you'll come to court and the day before you receive the papers, and there's many things you won't understand in the papers, so you have to reach out. And then sometimes you'll come to court and the judge will say, I don't have this or I don't have that. Was this sent? And you just don't know. So I think that's the one thing that they avoid by having everything go through the same firm is they know where it's come from, they've done the prep, and it's their case. So I think it does make things easier in that sense for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like anything, there's arguments for and against both systems, and
Definitely.
probably is no perfect system out there, but as you say, certainly some advantages there that can be seen. I think stemming on from the same question or from the same sort of topic. So I understand in France you have a civil law system over there, whereas we have the common law system here in England and Wales. Did you find that there was a sort of a difference for you as a student of the law when you were studying a civil law system versus studying a common law system?
Well, they're two different systems, and the common law system attracted me more, which is why I came back. Because basically, civil law, it will turn mostly around statutes. It's not that we don't have case law, it's just it doesn't have the same importance. And the problem that I saw with it, and the problem that courts have, is they will have just one sentence for a statute and they have to apply it to every type of situation. But they don't have any factual background or anything to back up why that's the law. So there's often times where a statute will come out and then people become aware that it just can't apply to a certain type of situation, but the court can't depart from the statute. So judgments are being given that are a bit inappropriate until then the law has to change. Whereas in England, what's great is we have a case where you have 30 pages, 40 pages, sometimes more of factual background. And oftentimes you'll have more than one case for the same legal issue, which means judges have so much more to go off. And lawyers can say so much more because you can find similarities between cases, or you can say, well, actually, we can't apply this because clearly the facts are different, so we're going to have to depart from this. That flexibility is such an advantage. And I feel like the law and the judgments can be really more precise because of how much more information they have with those cases. So I think it's a lot better. I prefer the common law system, definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree. I quite like the common law system, and of course, we are speed mooting here, and I couldn't imagine, or I could imagine how different a moot would be if you were in a civil law system versus a common law system where your cases might only have persuasive authority. So I can imagine that mooting is very different over in France.
There's less mooting. So the education is so different between France and England. In England, at university, I remember your schedule was such that you did have time outside of university to write the dissertations, sometimes maybe have a part-time job. Whereas in France, I remember coming back in my third year and I had 35 hours of lectures every week. And then on top of that, I had 2 dissertations that had to be done and submitted every week and could be marked potentially every week. I had 10 modules per semester. I mean, the content was just a lot more intense, which means that there was less time. And I think the reason for that is in England, studying and having your degrees doesn't get you into the legal profession. You have to be recruited, whether it's a training contract or pupillage, there's a recruitment process afterwards. Whereas in France, once you go through your academics and once you get that bar, which has a much, much lower pass rate, that's essentially it. I mean, you still have to get into a chambers, but your qualification is there. And you go into 2 years of law school, they call it, after the bar. And after that, you are a barrister, what you would call a barrister. So I think that's also why it's different, is England puts so much focus on other activities aside of university to develop that CV and not just have your degree at the end of it. You're expected to have more. Whereas France, it's really all about the academics.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. Quite a significant difference there. And certainly, on our podcast, we're always talking about ways that you build your CV, doing extracurricular activities. But yeah, it's interesting seeing that distinction there and how much sort of emphasis is placed on the academics.
Hmm.
Um, I suppose sort of a final question I've got then. Am I right in thinking that in France you have sort of an inquisitorial system in your courts as opposed to our adversarial system?
Yeah, because I haven't actually practiced in France. I've been to the court in the UK as a counsel advocate. I haven't practiced in France. Obviously, France does have a different system, but I have to say, from what I've seen of both systems, it's not the most stark difference. Something else that might maybe catch your attention more as a barrister in crime is, for example, in France, victims don't have to just be witnesses. They can make themselves a party and be represented by a lawyer, and that is the only circumstance in which a lawyer would not be on the defence, would be on the victim's side, but a lawyer can never prosecute. So in France, to be what you would call a crown prosecutor, it's a completely different exam. It's not the bar, it's something else, and it's the same for prosecutors and judges and other professions.
No, that's really interesting. That's news to me. I always learn something new on these podcasts, so always interesting to learn about that. So, of course, you've finished your legal studies now, and you work as a county court advocate. Would you like to talk to our listeners just a little bit about what that role involves and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, so I think I'll talk about how it evolves because I don't want people to think as soon as you start, that's everything you're doing all at once. So there's a range of hearings that you can attend as a county court advocate. You are limited to small claims track, so it's only civil claims and it's only small claims track. You can't go on to fast track. But things that we do deal with are applications, preliminary hearings, possession hearings, so landlord and tenant, consumer rights and road traffic accidents, credit hire, which is when someone has an accident and they hire a car and you have to dispute whether they're allowed to recover the full amount or not. And you start on with a type of hearing that's called infant approval hearings, where there's no one really against you, or preliminary hearings where there's not much in dispute and we're not going to go into the detail of the law. And so you will do that for a few weeks because you have to learn so much of how a court actually works. You don't know anything before you go in. And then progressively, you will move on to more difficult cases and you just learn so much about the law. But above everything else, it is about learning how to be an advocate, convince a judge, deal with your opponents, deal with a client, deal with communication with solicitors. And it's just, you learn every day. Cases are different every day, evidence is different every day. And I feel like when you come out of the bar, for those who haven't got pupillage straight away, you've got different options. You can be a paralegal, you can do, jobs you can do in the legal industry. But I feel like going into county court advocacy is the safest way to have a high level of responsibility straight out your studies, because from what I've experienced, when you're a paralegal or an intern, there is a risk of you having to do quite a lot of admin, or you might be doing repetitive tasks. I'm not saying it's the same for all paralegal jobs, but there is a risk when you start a job and you don't really know what it's going to be like until you actually start it and you're in there. Whereas county court advocacy, you know that from the very start you will have that level of responsibility. You'll be at the end of cases, so what you do in courts is it's going to be determinative for the case. So I think it really is a great option once you finish the bar to go into county court advocacy, even if you don't intend to practice in civil law.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a fantastic opportunity. And I think the other thing that I've picked up from what you're saying there is it sounds like you're in court pretty much every day, if not every
You
day.
are.
And that's so important for advocacy. If you want to develop as an advocate, you need to be in court all the time because it's like riding a bike. The more you do it, the more proficient you become. You need to be doing it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I took the alternative route to what you're describing there. I worked as a paralegal when I was looking for pupillage, and I was allowed to do advocacy as part of my job. So similar to what you were doing, I'm doing advocacy in district judges' chambers. But once again, because I had a job as a paralegal, I wasn't in court every day. I'd probably go once a week, once a fortnight, sometimes maybe a little bit more than that. So you're not really building up on those skills. And then whenever something does come into the firm that you think, might be a bit juicy, it could be a small claims trial, it could be something a bit more of a meaty application, they'll tend to just instruct counsel because it's the safer option than sending somebody who goes to court once a week, once a fortnight. So as you say, you're building the skill, and that's what probably the reason that you're exposed to much more higher level work there. But it was funny you were talking about the infant's approval hearing. That was my first ever piece of advocacy as a
Mine too.
paralegal. And it's literally the simplest piece of advocacy. For those who are listening, an infant's approval hearing would be, let's say you've had a road traffic collision, a young child's been injured, and they might have whiplash, and it's been agreed that they can have, I don't know, let's pick a figure, £1,500 for compensation. But then you need to go before the court, and the court needs to approve, hence the name, infant's approval hearing. And so, the submissions can literally be 60 seconds. Here was an accident, here are the injuries, here's the medical report, here's counsel's advice, here's what we settled for. I must have spent 3 or 4 hours prepping for that first hearing. You'd have thought I was going to the Court of Appeal or something.
I was really nervous for mine too, and luckily my first infant approval hearing, all the papers were there, everything was sorted, and I went in so nervous, and the judge ended up not talking to me except to confirm my name, because he had everything he wanted and he did not need to hear from me at all. So it was a hello, everything's there, order approved, goodbye.
Well,
so there are times where you just don't speak.
Your first one went better than mine did. I went in and I had a particularly finicky judge, if I put it that way, and had all the papers there, did all my submissions, got to the end of it. I thought, right, we're just going to get this rubber stamped. And he goes, Mr. Dove, I can't approve this. Do you know why? I was like, no. Are you sure you don't know why? No. He goes, look at the claim form. Okay. Look at the birth certificate. Whoever had drafted the claim form and all the other documents that go with it didn't put the middle name from the birth certificate on the claim form. And he said, therefore,
I've
it's
had
not
those
going
happen,
right
yeah.
through. So some judges say, do you know what, we can just amend that, it's no problem. But others say, no, go away, sort the papers, bring it back to court.
Yeah.
So my first one wasn't even approved.
Oh, well, yeah, I was definitely lucky in my first one. But about county court advocacy, I did want to say, because I do encourage everyone to go, but I just want to put people on notice. It is a self-employed job. So what you did of being a paralegal and then going to court, I think is a more financially stable and secure position, because some people do that. Some people will be in-house advocates, and there is recruitment for that. But I think for those positions, you are often asked for experience beforehand. Whereas with these agencies, the really good thing is I was recruited straight out of the bar, and I've looked at a lot of applications for basically every agency out there, and what you need is the bar, but they don't really ask for actual experience in law. But with those agencies, being self-employed, I know when I started, I was under the impression I could go full-time straight away. And obviously I'm not from here, so I can't live at my parents' house and then have all expenses paid. And I'm sure there's loads of other people in my situation which need to have that income. And just to be careful that at the beginning, don't expect to have a salary at the end of the month, or prepare yourself not to. I know I went into it thinking I'll be absolutely fine and I'll have an income every month. And I think I didn't get an income the first month at all, just because of how it works, the delay in payments, and you have to start slow anyways because you've got to get used to the work. So just for anyone who's in my situation and needs an income, just prepare for that situation before you start, at least for the first 2 or 3 months, I would say. Just to be safe.
That's a really good health warning, and that was one of the reasons I went into an employed role as a paralegal as opposed to doing the self-employed county court advocacy. I always had that risk in the back of my mind, so that was one of the factors that was at play for me. But yeah, no, great warning out there for people. So you've mentioned as one of your many degrees that you have a master's in criminal law and in criminology. Now, as far as I understand it, you can't study criminology in every country. I think we're one of the few countries here in England where criminology is a degree that can be studied. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, that's correct. In France, it's not recognised as a discipline, which really annoyed my lecturer at the time, who was a very good lecturer in criminology. That's the one really good advantage that students who are interested in crime have in England, is they can have a full-on degree in criminology. And from my understanding, that's something that you only have in England, Belgium, Canada, and the US. So it's a great opportunity for anyone who's considering a career in law, but in crime. I think that doing a degree in criminology and then a conversion course in GDL is a great idea, something definitely to consider.
Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting. And just taking sort of one further step backwards now, we've moved sort of forwards to your current role. We're taking a step backwards. So you've mentioned that you did an internship. We understand, you've got many degrees. Did you undertake any volunteering or other work experience that you think has helped you along the way?
I've done so much volunteering along the way because I think when you're an undergraduate, it is just, I'm going to say difficult, but I think quite impossible to get a paid part-time legal work experience on the side. So for at least those 3 years of undergraduate degree, all you've got there is your volunteering work and those paid internships during summer. I know there are some, but they are difficult to get and they are very competitive. Again, I'm very conscious that a lot of students, and I think it's not really spoken a lot about, but cannot afford to volunteer for the whole summer in a legal firm, and then those legal internships are so competitive. But a great way to get around that are the legal clinics in the universities. Usually universities do have them. I know University of Essex had them. Every university I went to in France had them. They usually do have a selection process to go through, but I definitely would focus on those. And I know in my legal clinics, I actually had first-hand interaction with clients. I worked on criminal, the non-molestation cases. And then also in France, I did some property cases. And it's a great way to do it during the year. And if you need to work during summer to be able to afford the rest of the year, that's a great way of doing it too. And then, of course, summer internships, if you can get one, it's just great experience. I mean, I think in England, because as I've said, it really is a recruitment process. From the very first year, you should be thinking, there's my degree. But then I would say even half of it is also about building my experience. So when I get out of my degree, I have access to those jobs in the legal profession.
So important. I mean, I certainly found that when when applying for pupillage, first time round, I did hardly any extracurricular activities, and we actually had sort of a street law clinic. I didn't take part in that, which I regret to this day. I should have done, really. And it means that when you come to apply for pupillage and you've got those questions asking about, what experience they have, what positions of responsibility have you held, and I couldn't really answer those questions. And it was only after a year or so of doing paralegal work that I could then go back and fill in the blanks on those questions.
Yes.
So it's so crucial. One of the pieces of advice I often give to people is when you start the degree, look at the forms for training contracts, look at the forms for pupillages, and think about what you can do during the degree to fill in those blanks and answer the questions that they're asking. So, you've given some great tips there.
Absolutely.
Now, on the 7th of September, you will be taking part in the National Speed Mooting Competition Autumn Cup. I'm speaking about this as if it's in the future, which it is right now, but by the time people are listening to this podcast, the competition may well have been and gone. Do you have much experience of mooting?
I do not have that much experience because in France, they didn't really have as many mooting opportunities as you have in England. And actually, when I was applying to the bar, there was an advocacy scholarship, and the first mooting I did in English was that. And I have to thank you for getting the scholarship because I was watching your, I think it was winter moot competition from 3 years ago. And I learned everything about how to do a plea in mitigation on that video that you recorded. And then I got the advocacy scholarship, and then I went from having my first moot to actually being what they call an advocacy scholar, so judging moots.
Right.
So I actually judged more moots than I did them. I did do Middle Temple, Rosamond, and I think I did an internal moot at the University of Law, but I honestly didn't have many opportunities during my actual double degree to do them. So I'm excited to try again.
Yeah, it'll be a fun competition for you. And the nice thing is, with the way that we set our competition up, it's a level playing field for everyone. So whether you've done all the top mooting competitions, you've done all, lots of regular mooting, or if you've never done any advocacy whatsoever, everyone's on a level playing field because all the materials are supplied. There's no research, no drafting, submissions are nice and short. And it's always sort of generally one point of appeal within the problems. So yeah, I'm sure you'll enjoy the experience. And we've had some very experienced mooters win the competition. We've also had people who have tried advocacy for the first time and go on to win on the day. So everyone's got a chance. So best of luck, and hope you have enjoy the day.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception. I know I had a misconception about mooting. I thought, why get into it? Because there's always going to be someone more experienced who's going to win. And then I think when you actually do your first moot, you realize, actually, I'm doing this because I'm learning so much. You don't understand how hard it is before you actually do it. So you learn so much and you realize it's not so much about winning, it's so much about learning. It's not about comparing yourself to someone who has more experience, because it depends so much on the case that's going to take place. So for anyone out there who's a bit worried because they haven't experienced and they think everyone else is going to have more experience and they don't know how to do it, that shouldn't be a consideration. Don't go in just to win, go in to learn.
The same applies in practice, because I go up against people who are 30, 40 years call.
Yeah,
And you can't go in with the mindset of, well, this guy's got so many
absolutely.
more
Yeah.
years than me. Otherwise you'd just be defeatist and you'd never win any cases. So
Hmm.
yes, people will have more experience, but it's about your own sort of take that you have, and your approach to the case. So completely agree.
And also for who English is second language, I know it can be really nerve-wracking. I know for myself, like, although I have trained my accent, so it might not sound like I can struggle, but I can really struggle with words sometimes. And I know, like, for us, there's that extra layer of stress on there. So for everyone who's like me, it gets better. It really does. And if a word slips that and it's mispronounced, if you haven't pronounced it well, just to not worry about it and go ahead with it anyways.
Yeah. And if anything does go wrong, don't panic. The big thing that I say with people is, they'll make a mistake. So, for example, they'll stutter, they'll mispronounce a word, they'll forget where they're up to, and then they go into this panic mode and they start apologising and flapping and flipping. Oh, very sorry. Oh, I've gone wrong here. What's happened? No, what I say to people is, in that situation, it's obvious that you've messed up. The judge sees that. It's fine. So just pause for a second, gather your thoughts.
Definitely. And I think that's something when you're not used to advocacy. I'm sorry, there's an ambulance going by. When you're not used to advocacy, you think you've just got to keep on speaking, because if you pause, then you've lost it. And then you realize when you go to court and when you go mooting, there's just nothing wrong with a pause. I mean, I've been against very experienced barristers who at some point decide they need to take a bit of time, like a 15 seconds to flick through those papers. It does not make their submission any worse, ever. It doesn't impact it. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah. Well, last quick question before we move on to our quick fire round at the end. Do you have any advice or any additional advice for those who are just starting out in their legal studies?
Yeah, so this was the big point that I wanted to get across, because I think it's not spoken about in England at all, is experience abroad in law. I think it might be something in other areas such as business, but I don't think people actually think about going abroad when it comes to law. And having done a double degree, I cannot stress enough how useful it is to know two judicial systems, because you develop a critical thinking that you can't really develop when you've only ever known one judicial system, because you always take it as, well, that's the law, that's what's right. But when you go outside and you see how different things can be in other systems, you'll just have that mindset of not taking things as they are. Think it through. I know people can be very scared of thinking, I don't know the language, I'll never be able to communicate, I can't do it. But actually you can. You'll learn the language, and the communication skills and the confidence you're going to get from it is going to help you in absolutely everything. But it will also help you a lot in your career. When you do have that experience abroad, it stands out so much. I mean, I know for myself, having a double degree is always the conversation starter for everything. And I know people, for example, who have been to the US and been on the death row. There's some volunteering opportunities. It is quite costly, but there are also some scholarships there. And I know for them too, I mean, they absolutely loved the experience, but also it always comes up in interviews. Every time they walk into an interview room, the first thing they're asked about is that experience they did in the US, because it just stands out so much. But even apart from that, I think there's just no better way to gain in confidence and gain in communication skills, because once you've had to learn and communicate in a different language or with a different culture, speaking in your own language and speaking with people from your own culture is going to feel like the easiest thing you've ever done. It's like everything gets easier after that. So really, I would encourage people, as soon as you start uni, even before uni, if you've just graduated, you're not sure what to do, to look for those opportunities abroad. There's the European Court that I know does take interns, and not just from Europe, also from England, the International Criminal Court, those opportunities in the US, and even if it's not a legal experience, so many other things that you can do, and it will help you also in your legal career. I'm absolutely sure of that.
Yeah, no, great advice there. Something I've never really thought about before, and something quite different to the advice we normally get on this podcast. Sounds like a really great opportunity for people. So yeah, thanks for bringing that one up. Okay, so we're going to finish now with some quick fire questions. So I know that you're very much into your podcasts. So which is your favourite podcast at the moment?
Honestly, it's all French podcasts, because I have to speak English every day, and then every time I have time to myself, I only listen to French, so I can give you references, but you won't know any of it. I'm sorry.
All right, no worries, no worries. We'll move on to the next one then. Favorite holiday destination?
I think it would be Brittany in France. The thing is, when you live abroad, going on holidays, it's basically visiting your family. And I come from a country where obviously there's so many places to visit. So I think my favourite holiday destination would be in my own country. The south of France is just amazing. The food is amazing. Paris is beautiful. So as a French person, I don't have to go very far to enjoy holidays. I don't have to hop on a plane like English people to get some sun.
Oh, perfect. What is your favourite meal?
I can't cook. So anything Italian in an Italian restaurant is amazing for me, because I'm just such a poor cook that I just eat very bad food until I actually go to a restaurant, to be honest.
I have to agree there. Pizza's my favourite. And lastly, are you an early bird or a night owl?
Night owl. I was the one to be at the university at 2 a.m, the university library, finishing that essay. Never in the morning, unfortunately. And especially with those universities that have the 24/7 library open, I mean, your sleep schedule is just, if you don't have self-discipline like I didn't have at the time, you just spend your nights there. Don't do that. For everyone at university, wake up at 9, have a decent day, don't be at the library until 5 a.m.
Great advice to finish there. Well, Emma-Justine, thank you very much for appearing on the podcast. I've learned so much speaking with you, and I'm sure our listeners have thoroughly enjoyed listening to you as well.
Thank you so much for having me.